It's looking quite festive here at the Bicycle Casino, but I'm not here for the Christmas cheer. Instead, I am here for some high stakes poker as per usual. Today, the game is going to be 50-100, which is quite big. Probably going to be 50-100, 200 at times. So yeah, let's try to close out the year on a good note. Things have been going very well so far. Expecting the sun run to end any second now, but hopefully not today. Anyway, that's all I got. Let's get in there and play some cards. Alright guys, here we go again. This time we're playing half 50-100, half 50-100, 200. This usually happens when you're in games where some people want to straddle and others don't. You just make a compromise and play a little bit of both. Anyway, I sit with $50,000, and in the first interesting hand, Drew raises to 300 on the button, and I look down at ace-10 offsuit in the small blind. In games that have a big blind ante in play, I think it's okay to call some hands from the small blind, so that's what I do, and we go heads up to a flop of King Jack 9. I check, and he bets $300. I've got a gut shot to the nuts. If any queen comes, it would be a very valuable card, and I could always try to bluff or win some other way later on, so I decide to float and see what happens on the turn, which is nothing too great, the 8 of hearts. It is worth noting that I have the ace of hearts, so perhaps could represent some backdoor flushes, but let's just see what happens. I check it again, and now Drew puts in $1,000. At this point, I don't really have a good enough hand to continue through a call. I think best options are probably to just fold and occasionally check raise, of course trying to represent Queen 10. That's what I decide to do this time. Starting off on the aggressive side right away, I check raise to $4,000, hoping to put him in a tough spot with any single pair holding. Seems like he's undeterred though because he makes the call, so looking for some help as we go to the river, which does not come. The 5 of diamonds changes absolutely nothing, unless of course one of us has 7-6. Not impossible, but either way, I've got ace high and a dream. Still thinking he could have some hands that would hate facing a big bet, such as any king, maybe pocket aces, for example. So I decide to bet $12,500. Me betting this river indicates either a complete bluff or a very good hand, so that's why I size up. After a little bit though, Drew decides to call, which is not surprising with his turn 2 pair, and we start the session off on quite a rough note. Shortly after, this hand goes down where Jong opens in late position to 300 and action folds to me in the big blind with 10-8 offsuit. With the big blind ante in play, I think this hand is okay to defend, so that's what I do, and we go heads up to a flop of 9-4-3 rainbow. Absolutely nothing going on for me. I check and he checks it back. Turn card is the 4 of spades, and while I think starting to bluff now is fine, I decide to check again, much like I would if I had a 9 or maybe some slow played pocket pairs. Jong checks it back, and I'm thinking I'm going to have to bluff the river until it's the 8 of clubs, giving me second pair and what I perceive to be the best hand most likely. Still, I could have hands like 10-7, jack high, all sorts of other stuff that would need to bet in order to win. So I decide to bet $650, hoping that my hand looks like a bluff. I'm praying that he calls, but eventually he decides on a raise to $2,100. This is a really interesting spot now. I think what's most likely going on is that Jong had either a 9, perhaps an overpair, but whatever it is, he's raising for value with a hand that's not super strong because he checked back twice. Meanwhile, I could have some slow plays like any 4, maybe pocket 3s, etc. I could also have a hand like pocket 8s. So with 10-8, some removal to full houses, although not much, I decide that instead of getting lazy and just calling, I'm going to put in another raise as a bluff. Once again, this would represent either a very strong hand or a total bluff, so going big is best, I think. With that in mind, I kick it up to $12,650. As you guys can see, Jong was going for some disrespectfully thin value against me with an 8, although a better kicker. Thankfully, though, we were able to figure this one out, and he ends up folding after a bit. Nice. A few rounds later, this hand goes down where Mike opens in early position to 500, and I re-raise on the button with pocket 9s. Probably okay to call with this hand as well, but this time I re-raise, and after he calls, we go heads up to a decent flop of 10-8-4 with 2 clubs. only one overcard to my pocket pair. So after he checks, I put in $1,100. And interestingly enough, he check raises to 4,700, which was over half his stack. At this point, he has around 34 remaining. So kind of interesting. It's essentially committing, but his chips aren't all in the middle. Either way, now I've got a decision to make between letting my hand go or just going with it. I've played against Mike quite a few times now, and I've noticed he check raises a lot or just raises in position when he has a hand that he thinks is best or just that he likes. However, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a very good hand, at least not against pocket nines in this situation. I wouldn't be surprised if he was doing this with like 8-7 suited, maybe just a flush draw. Obviously, he could have a 10 or even maybe pocket jacks, but what I'm trying to say is there are also some hands in there that we could be in good shape against. So not exactly a fist pump situation or anything, but after some thought, I decided to just go with it. Mike calls right away, which is not good news, and sure enough, he's got King 10. That's good enough to beat pocket nines even after we run it twice. So yet again, we lose a big pot. Perhaps today is not my day after all. I add on an additional $50,000, so now I'm in for $100,000, and we move along to this fun hand. In this one, the $200 straddle is on. I open ace-4 on the button to $600. Jung calls in the big blind, and then Mike squeezes really big, $3,800. Of course, this could be a very good hand, no questions asked, but I think he could also be trying to steal it since I opened on the button so I could have a wide variety of hands, and Jung called in the big blind, so he's incentivized to squeeze perhaps a little bit lighter than normal. So, with an ace in my hand, some removal to strong stuff, and the fact that he made it so big pre-flop, which I think could indicate some weakness, I decide to turn my ace-4 offsuit into a bluff, aka a punt, if I'm being honest. I make it $15,000 to go. Jong folds, and I'm thinking Mike is probably going to fold too. Just kidding. He goes all in. As y'all can see, he's got ace-king. That is a very good hand, but it's only $3,000 more for me to call. Any two cards would qualify at this point. He decides to run it twice yet again. I'm in pretty rough shape, and I let him know right away that I've got ace high. He says, me too. Not what I wanted to hear. But lo and behold, we end up chopping the first board as we both make two pair with an ace kicker. And then on the second board, I make a pair of fours, which is good enough to beat his ace king. When it's all said and done, I end up winning 75% of the pot in a very undeserving way. However, there's been plenty of times where I've been on the other side of this. No complaints whatsoever. I'll take it. Nothing like a little bit of luck to get the momentum going back in the right direction. Let's see if we can keep that going in this one where Mike opens to 500, Drew calls, and I look down at ace-jack on the button. Decide to re-raise it, make it 2,000 to go. Mike calls, Drew folds, we go heads up in position to a great flop. Jack 4 deuce rainbow. I finally make a strong hand here today. Pot's around $5,000. Mike checks it over to me, and I continue with a bet of $1,300. Pretty much right away, he check raises to 5,000, once again committing his stack as he's only got like 3,000 left. So I decide to move all in. He calls right away, and as you guys can see, this time it's another fortunate situation for myself as we're up against King Jack. Kind of a cooler, if I'm being honest. Yet again, we run it twice, and this time end up holding on both boards. Pretty rough couple of hands for Mike. Try not to feel bad, and remember that poker is fair and unfair to everyone who plays long enough. A few minutes later, this interesting hand comes up where Jung limps in early position, Mike limps as well, and I look down at pocket fours in the small blind. All right, I toss in the extra $50, and Vivian checks, so a four-way limped pot in which I instantly regret not raising pre-flop when we flop middle set, 10-4-3 with two hearts. I decide to get sneaky and check it, but unfortunately it checks all the way around. Turn card brings us some help, although I don't think we needed it. It's the 10 of clubs, giving me a full house. I check again, fingers crossed that someone has a 10, but sadly it checks around yet again. River comes the 7 of clubs. Now I'm going to put in a small bet and try to make it look like I'm block betting with a 7 or perhaps some small pocket pair like 5s or 6s, hoping this induces a raise, and who knows, maybe someone even slow played a 10 on the turn. And it seems like perhaps that's what's going on because I put in $300 and then Vivian makes it $1,500 on my direct left. Action folds back around to me, and I feel like she could be bluffing since my hand doesn't look too strong, but just in case she does have a 10, I go for quite a big raise, $8,000. It would really suck if she raised again. If I'm being honest, I'd probably fold since we're most likely up against a better hand if that happens. However, she ends up just calling. That's going to be good news, and sure enough, she had a 10 all along. So huge cooler, and once again, one that's going in our direction. We're finally clawing back out into the green, or I guess the black. I don't know. You guys have different words for it. You know what I mean. We're not stuck anymore. I think we can all agree that flopping sets is pretty sweet. Let's try to do it again in this one where there's a raise to $500. I call in the small blind with pocket sixes, and Jong defends the straddle. Yup, there it is. 7-8-6 with 2 spades, a very wet board. I think about leading out for a little bit since this type of flop is good for the blinds, but decide to check instead. Jong checks as well, and Mike puts in a bet of $800. I'm going to check raise right away since I could easily be doing this with all sorts of bluffs, make it $3,000 to go. And interestingly enough, Jong now calls. Mike gets out of the way, so not entirely what I was anticipating, but that's fine. We're getting some action with a set. Can't ever be mad about that. Turn card is kind of odd. It's another 8. So now we could be losing to, I guess, hands like 8-7, but for the most part, it's a very good card. Of course, continuing to bet makes a ton of sense since, I've got a full house. It's not rocket science, but against Jong, I've noticed he bets a lot with hands that maybe shouldn't necessarily. For example, I wouldn't be surprised if he continued betting with a straight or some sort of draw. So I decide to try to build the pot as much as I can by checking and hoping that he bets. And sure enough, he does bet. However, it is a very big sizing of $7,000, almost a pot-sized bet. A little bit concerning. Maybe we're up against pocket 7s or 8-7, 8-6, pocket 8s. I know you shouldn't be scared of monsters under the bed, but I just don't get the feeling he's bluffing. Of course, he could just have a single 8, but seems a little bit optimistic on his end to be betting this big with one of those hands. So after a little bit of thought, I decide to just call and set the trap. If he's got an 8 or some sort of bluff, he's probably going to bet the river again, and if we're behind, we'll exercise some pot control. River is a blank, the 3 of hearts. I check it again, planning on calling essentially any size bet that he puts out there, but he ends up checking back. I turn it over, and of course we're winning after that action, but much to my surprise, he flashes me the 8 of spades. So yeah, he completely wrecked me on the river by checking that hand back. Gotta be honest, I would have gone for some value in his shoes, so nice play, Jong. About an hour later, this hand goes down where action folds all the way to Ju in the small blind, and he raises it up to 300. I look down at 6-4 suited in the big blind. We've got position and a playable hand, so I decide to get a little feisty and re-raise this one. Ju is having none of it. After some thought, he puts in another raise of his own. Of course, it seems like we're in bad shape at this point, but I've got some low suited cards that could connect well on certain types of boards, and if he's got an overpair and we hit something good, we could probably win his remaining $25,000 or $30,000. So I call, fingers crossed for something good on the flop, which doesn't really come. Jack, 4, deuce, rainbow, not a single spade out there. Yeah, I flop middle pair, which, is good since now we're beating hands like ace king or ace queen, but we could still be in some serious trouble. Ju continues with a bet of $6,000, and like I said, we're still beating some hands, and I know Ju's got a lot of heart, so wouldn't be surprised if he was bluffing. I call, hoping for some help on the turn, although I'm not really sure if I need it, which of course is the main problem of playing hands like these. But what do you know? We get some help in the 6 of hearts, giving me a very disguised 2 pair, essentially the only 2 pair available on this board that I would ever have, and even at that, it wouldn't be too often. Pot's around $26,000. As you guys can see, Ju was getting a little out of line with the old Queen 8 suited, but he turned a flush draw. Can you really blame the man for going all in at this point? Of course not. Unfortunately for him, I turned a very strong hand, so I call right away. We run it twice and end up holding, so we win a very big pot, and for the first time today, we're up a considerable amount of money. In the next fun hand of poker, Vivian opens in early position. Ju calls in the small blind, and I look down at pocket kings in the big blind. Raise it up to $1,500, but Vivian is having none of that. Instead, she makes it $4,500. Ju folds, and it's back on me. Since she opened from early position and I re-raised her, I think my hand looks really strong. So the fact that she's putting in even more money is a little bit scary. We're infinitely deep. She's got over $150,000. So even though I do have a very strong hand, it is just one pair, and that can get a little scary when you're playing this many big blinds. So I decide to just call and see what happens on the flop. 7-5 deuce looks like a good one to me. Suspect will most likely have the best hand, unless of course she has the dreaded pocket aces. Nothing to do but just check and call her continuation bet, hoping for a clean turn, and that's what we get. The 8 of hearts still shouldn't change anything. I doubt either of us would be interacting too much with this kind of board, given all the pre-flop shenanigans. I check it over to her again, but she doesn't slow down. $9,000 this time. Now I am starting to wonder if we're in some trouble, but still beating all sorts of bluffs and pocket pairs like queens and jacks, maybe even tens, which I wouldn't be too surprised if she played this way. So I call once again, and we see a good river, the 7 of hearts. If we had the best hand pre-flop, we should still have the best hand now. Nothing's really changed on this board that might indicate otherwise. I check it a third time. Vivian does not. Instead, she puts in a bet of $29,000. I, of course, call right away since we're beating all bluffs and all smaller pocket pairs, really only losing to aces. That's what she's got, though. This one really hurt because we were stuck so much early on and managed to claw all the way back, but now stuck yet again around $30,000 or $25,000. This game can be rough sometimes, but nothing to do besides get back on the horse and keep things going. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we move to the most interesting hand of the night. The 200 is on in this one, and I look down at 9-7 suited in middle position, raise it up to 600, and then action gets to Ju, who makes it 3,000 from the straddle. Pretty big raise, but considering that we're deep and in position, once again, this is the type of hand that I'm happy to see a flop with. So that's what I do, and we go heads up to Jack 10-4 with 2 clubs, essentially giving me nothing but a very optimistic straight draw. Ju continues with a small bet of $2,500, and I know what you're thinking. I have absolutely nothing, time to just let it go. However, this is a board where I would sometimes have very good hands, and he might still have ace-king or ace-queen, so I decide to call, essentially floating in hopes of stealing it later on, or who knows, maybe even making the best hand one way or another. Turn card is the 3 of hearts, and after a few seconds, Ju checks. This is the green light for me to put my plan into motion, hoping he's not setting the trap with an overpair or some sort of good hand. But even if he is and ends up check raising all in, I'm not going to be too upset about having to fold a gut shot. If I did have some sort of combo draw, that would definitely suck, but don't have to worry about that with 9-7 of spades on this board. I weigh all my options in terms of sizing, and even though betting small seems totally fine, I instead decide to overbet in hopes of making him fold any ace-high sort of holding right away, perhaps even a 10 or pocket 9s or 8s. Pot is $6,400, and I put in a bet of $10,000. Would not recommend playing this aggressively with my hand every single time, but once in a blue moon, I think it's okay just to remain unpredictable and not a very easy person to play poker against. However, for Ju, it does seem pretty easy because he ends up calling with ace high and the best hand, I might add. So this hand is becoming quite interesting, and even more so when the river comes the 9 of clubs, and Ju ships it all in there for around $20,000 on this card. What is going on? I have absolutely no idea. I haven't been this perplexed about a hand in a while, but being confused isn't going to work. Time to figure this one out and put the pieces together of this puzzle. So, obviously, I've got third pair in a very, very big pot. Can't blame me for just letting it go. Let's just get that out of the way. Folding seems more than okay. But, given how this hand's gone down, I just don't understand what he could possibly have. If he had a hand like ace-king of clubs, ace-queen of clubs, ace-jack of clubs, etc., I would suspect he would check raise all in on the turn since I bet so big, he's probably not looking to call with just a draw out of position. And the same concept applies for maybe a hand like aces, kings, pocket jacks, pocket tens, anything good. He might just say screw it and check raise all in on the turn. Not all players would, but I think Ju would almost every single time. So think I'm starting to discount those hands. However, we also got to ask, what do we even beat? If he has a hand like ace king or ace queen, would he really call the turn even after I bet so large? I don't know, seems awfully hopeful on my end. But I just can't help but wonder what strong hands play this way. I just don't get it. It would really suck if he has a hand like ace jack or ace 10 with the ace of clubs and he's turning it into a bluff, because then if I end up hero calling, he beats me anyway. That's not good. Very tough spot, I gotta admit. We're getting around 3-1, which means I don't have to have the best hand very often, only like 25% of the time or so. Do I have the best hand a quarter of the time? I don't know. I think it's very debatable, but I just can't put the pieces together on this one. I know Drew's been having a rough night, so I was expecting him to maybe get a little out of line at one point or another. Is this that time? Maybe, maybe not. Only one way to find out, but what if I'm wrong and I end up losing like $20,000 that I didn't need to lose? I don't know. It's going to be close. Let's see what happens.
How is Mariano even thinking about this one? How sick is he? What is he putting Drew on? He has to put Drew on exactly ace king, ace queen with the club, or 5-6. Oh, Mariano makes the call. How?
Right, so in the end, even though this was a very questionable call, I just couldn't put the pieces together as to what he would play this way for value. And when that's the case, as you guys know, I tend to call. Luckily this time, it ended up working out, and we win a pot that very much helped getting things back in the right direction. That was the last interesting hand of the stream, but we did play one more fun one after the cameras were shut off. So for this one, we're going to switch to my handheld camera. There's an open from Jong to $300. Mike makes it $1,000 on the button, and I look down at 2 red jacks in the big blind. Good enough for a raise, so I make it $2,400. Jong cold calls the $2,400. And then Mike calls as well. So 3 of us going to a flop. I am out of position, but it matters not as we flop middle set. Ace, jack, 4, rainbow. Fingers crossed that someone's got something. I continue with a $3,000 bet. Jong folds, unfortunately, and Mike does not fold. Instead, he announces all in for $13,000 and change. Of course, I call right away and turn over what I presume is bad news for him. And sure enough, he flips ace jack. Can you believe that? Top 2 versus middle set. Doesn't get much worse than that for the person on the wrong end of it. We run it twice, and yet again, against this opponent tonight, end up holding. So we win a $34,000 pot to end the night. This was the last hand. Game ended up breaking right after this one, sadly, but that's okay because it ended up working out for me. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed the hands. All right, back at the end of the session. Once again, the only one here. I gotta say this. I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but this video and the previous video, and I think the one before, there's been some really interesting hands. So I hope you guys agree with that sentiment. I feel like so many of these pots and spots and decision points have just been like really unique and noteworthy. But anyway, today was an absolute battle, kind of a bloodbath. Luckily, it ended up working out for me. I was down like 30 or 40,000 at one point. Then I got back up and then back down to like minus 25 or 30K after the kings versus aces hand. And then roller coastered back to the black, ended up winning. It looks like something near the $30,000 ballpark. As always, you guys will see the exact results right here, but holy cow, today was just wild. Anyway, I am very much looking forward to playing 5-10, 5-10-20 at Morongo on Saturday. These games can get a little stressful, so whether I win or lose at that game, it shouldn't be much compared to the size of these particular stakes. All right, guys, as always, thank you so much for watching. Thanks for the support. If you gave this video a thumbs up, I really appreciate it. And I'm going to go get some food and go to bed because I am mentally and physically exhausted. So, as always, until next time, good luck at the tables. Peace.